All right, let's dive into some really cool ideas about how groups work together or don't work together effectively. We're going to be looking at Mancur Olson Jr.'s The Logic of Collective Action.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's a book that, when you read it, it makes you think differently about everything,
Yeah.
from like neighborhood committees
Right.
all the way up to nations.
Whole countries, yeah.
And you might be surprised at how much like a bustling marketplace and your gym membership actually have in common.
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting about Olson is that he really challenges this traditional view of groups.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to think of people naturally coming together
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
around shared goals, but he really digs into why that isn't always the case,
Right.
especially as groups start to grow.
Makes sense. I mean, we've all had that experience where it's like too many cooks in the kitchen.
All right, yeah.
But Olson goes like deeper than that.
Yeah.
He's like looking at the incentives
Yeah, he is.
that drive or hinder collective action.
Absolutely. And he starts by laying out this really simple premise. Organizations exist to further the shared interests of their members.
Okay.
So, labor unions,
Yeah.
professional associations,
Mhm.
governance,
Got-
they all kind of fit this mold.
So there's this assumption then that individuals within a group have common goals.
Right.
Like everyone's like on the same page.
Right. But here's the catch.
Okay.
Olson recognizes that within those shared interests, there's also this constant tension with individual self-interest.
Oh.
So let's say you're part of a workers' union, right?
Yeah.
And you're fighting for higher wages.
Okay.
Obviously, that's a common goal.
Makes sense.
Everyone wants to get paid more.
Mm.
But individually, you'd probably love to be the person who gets the biggest raise.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that competitive spirit doesn't just go away because you're part of a group.
Exactly.
So how does Olson address this push and pull between like the individual desires and then the collective good?
Well, he brings in this concept of public goods,
Okay.
things that we all benefit from once they're provided, regardless of whether we contributed or not.
Gotcha.
Think national defense, clean air, public parks, that sort of thing.
The free rider problem. Like, oh, if I don't chip in, someone else will, and I'll still, get to breathe the air.
Exactly.
But if everyone thinks that way, then we're all kind of in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Olson makes this really brilliant connection
Okay.
between this dilemma and something that you wouldn't think is related at all,
Yeah.
the behavior of firms in a competitive market.
Okay.
Each company is trying to maximize its own profit,
Yeah.
which leads to overproduction, which can actually hurt everybody in the long run.
Whoa, so you're saying even in like a bustling marketplace where it seems like everyone, all these individual businesses are doing well,
Yeah.
there's still this tension
Underlying tension. Yep.
between self-interest and the collective good.
That's exactly what Olson's getting at.
Oh, wow.
It's, this isn't just about hippie communes or charities.
Right.
This dynamic plays out in all sorts of economic and social systems.
Fascinating.
And it gets really interesting when you start to apply this lens to something as powerful as the state.
Okay, yeah, now I'm seeing those parallels.
Yeah.
But hold on a second. If even the state, with all of its authority, all of its resources, if it can't just rely on people's goodwill, right, to fund the essential services, then what does that say about other large organizations?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's where Olson gets really hot-provoking.
Yeah.
He argues that if even the state, with its appeals to patriotism, ideology, can't survive on voluntary contributions,
Right.
how can we expect other large organizations to do so?
Which is why we have things like taxes.
Exactly.
It's a form of compulsion, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that people are contributing to these public goods that we all benefit from.
Exactly.
So if the state with all its power can't just rely on donations,
Right.
think about how much harder it is for like, I don't know, like a large environmental organization
Right.
to get people to open their wallets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's a real reality check.
It is.
So if large groups are inherently susceptible to this free rider problem, does
Yeah.
that mean they're doomed to be ineffective?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Olson doesn't argue that large groups can't succeed,
Mhm.
but he highlights the inherent challenges they face.
Okay.
And that's where his analysis of the differences between small and large groups gets really fascinating.
Okay, I'm hooked. This is making me rethink how I view every group that I'm a part of, from
Yeah.
my book club to like my professional network.
Sure.
So tell me more about those differences.
Okay. Well, Olson kind of challenges this traditional theory that humans have this like innate group instinct.
Yeah.
This idea that we're all just hardwired to join and participate in groups.
Right, right. Like safety in numbers back in the caveman days.
Exactly. But Olson points to research showing that, most people actually don't belong to that many large organizations.
Mm.
And he suggests there might be this fundamental difference in how small groups and large groups actually function.
Interesting.
Uh,
So what is it about smaller groups that makes them more effective at achieving their goals?
yeah,
Is it just harder to hide when there's like no crowd to hide in?
that's definitely part of it. Olson argues that in a small group, it's much easier to see the direct impact of your contribution.
Uh-huh.
You're not just a nameless face in a sea of donors.
Yeah, right.
Your actions actually make a visible difference.
So like it's the difference between like splitting a pizza with five friends
Mhm.
and, giving a dollar to some massive charity.
Yeah,
Figuratively.
exactly. And one, you know exactly what you're getting, and the
Yeah.
other, it's just like a drop in the bucket.
Precisely. And that sense of individual impact can be a powerful motivator in small groups, but as a group grows, that feeling gets diluted.
Right.
And that free ride problem we talked about earlier becomes more pronounced.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But surely there are some large groups that, manage to function effectively, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'm thinking of like, successful social movements or, big political campaigns.
Sure.
These things involve huge numbers of people working together.
You're absolutely right. And Olson acknowledges that there are exceptions to these general tendencies.
Okay.
For example, when a group is facing an existential threat,
Uh-huh.
the stakes are so high that individual self-interest often takes a back seat.
Okay.
So, think about communities rallying together after a natural disaster,
Yeah.
or citizens mobilizing during a war.
Right. It's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Suddenly, everyone's on the same team, regardless of their individual differences.
Makes sense.
But even in those situations, Olson argues that, strong leadership and a sense of shared identity are crucial for coordinating effective action.
Mhm.
It's not just about everyone, spontaneously doing the right thing. There needs to be some structure and organization.
So it's not just about the size of the group, it's
Right.
also the context,
So context, yeah.
the leadership, and that shared sense of purpose.
Exactly. It's much more nuanced than just like small groups, good, big groups, bad.
Yeah.
Olson's work encourages us to look deeper, to understand these complexities of group dynamics beyond just these simple generalizations.
This is giving me so much to think about.
Yeah.
Especially like with all my involvement in different groups.
Sure.
But before I go off and like start analyzing every meeting I attend, I'm curious, does Olson offer any insights into how to like actually promote collective action in large groups?
That's a great question.
It feels like we've mostly been focused on the challenges so far.
Yeah, and while Olson's primary focus is on analyzing the logic of collective action,
Okay.
he does offer some hints
Okay.
about, how we can apply these insights to real-world situations.
Okay, so give me the actionable stuff, the nuggets.
Well, for starters, he highlights the importance of selective incentives.
Okay.
These are benefits that are specifically tied to contributing to the group's goals above and beyond the collective good itself.
So it's not just about like, feeling good that you're doing good for the world.
Right.
You need a little something extra.
You need a little extra something to sweeten the deal, especially in those larger groups.
Okay.
So think about it this way. If a large environmental organization wants more members,
Yeah.
they might offer some exclusive perks, a cool tote bag or early access to events.
Right, you get that tote bag.
Exactly. So people feel like they're getting something tangible for joining, on top of supporting a cause they believe in.
Makes sense.
And it's not just limited to material goods,
Mm-hmm.
right? Selective incentives can also be things like recognition, access to information, or networking opportunities.
Gotcha.
The key is that they're only available to those who actually contribute
Mm.
to the group's goals.
It's really interesting how Olson connects all these like seemingly disparate things. It's like the same logic applies whether you're talking about like a small business offering, like loyalty rewards
Right.
or a global movement trying to get millions of people to, do something. It
Absolutely.
all comes back to human motivation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And speaking of motivation, another key takeaway from Olson's work is the power of social norms and shared values.
So it's not just about like cold, hard calculations of costs and benefits.
Right.
There's also that element of like social pressure or, feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and Olson points out that, strong social norms can sometimes act as this kind of invisible hand,
Mm-hmm.
guiding individuals towards collective action, even when their individual self-interest might suggest otherwise.
Can you give me an example of that?
Sure, think about voting in a democratic election.
Okay.
From a purely rational perspective, your individual vote is unlikely to be the deciding factor, especially in a large-scale election.
Right. I've had that thought, like, does my vote even matter?
Exactly.
Especially when you see those like razor thin margins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But many people vote anyway.
Wow.
And often it's because of, a sense of civic duty, a belief in the importance of democratic participation,
Right.
or simply because, everyone else is doing it.
So it's like, even though it might not make sense from a purely individualistic perspective, there's that social pressure,
Right.
that obligation
duty, right.
to do the thing that benefits everybody.
Exactly. And Olson highlights how these social norms and shared beliefs can be incredibly powerful forces in motivating collective action, especially in situations where, material incentives or punishments are weak or absent.
So Olson is basically saying we're not just like rational robots, like calculating our every move based on self-interest.
Right.
There's also this like social and psychological dimension to it,
Absolutely.
to how we decide to, participate or not participate in collective efforts.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it highlights why, understanding Olson's work is so valuable, not just for economists or political scientists,
Yeah.
but for anyone who wants to understand how groups function
Right.
and how to make them function more effectively.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have this like whole new framework for thinking about group dynamics. But before we wrap up, I have one more burning question. You've given us a lot to think about in terms of how these groups, work, but what about us? Like, how can we as individuals use this knowledge about, the logic of collective action to make like smarter choices about the groups we join and how we participate in them?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And I think Olson's work really gives you this framework for making more informed decisions.
Yeah.
So instead of just going with the flow or feeling obligated to join every group that comes your way,
Right.
you can actually, apply these insights to your own decision making.
So it's not just blindly following the crowd.
Exactly.
I can actually use this lens, this logic of collective action lens,
You got it.
to figure out if a group is worth my time and energy.
Absolutely. So when you're considering joining a group, ask yourself a few key questions.
Yeah.
What's the collective good they're trying to achieve? How likely are they to succeed considering their size and the nature of that good?
Mm-hmm.
Are their goals, realistic?
Yeah.
And do they align with your values and priorities?
That makes sense. It's so easy to get like caught up in the excitement of a new group or a new movement.
Okay.
But like taking that step back and really thinking critically about like, okay, what are their chances of success
Right.
is so important.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And don't forget to consider your individual incentives for participating.
Okay.
Do those incentives, go beyond just the warm, fuzzy feeling of being part of the group?
Yeah.
Are there concrete benefits,
Yeah.
opportunities to network or a chance to make a tangible difference that aligns with your own goals?
Yeah.
It's about finding that sweet spot where your personal motivations intersect with the group's mission.
So it's about being strategic and intentional with my choices,
Sure.
about which groups I join and how I engage with them.
Absolutely. And if you're already part of a group that's struggling to achieve its goals,
Mm-hmm.
Olson's work encourages you to think creatively about solutions.
Okay.
Could you help the group develop stronger selective incentives?
Okay.
Maybe exclusive events or opportunities for members.
Right.
Could you work to foster a greater sense of shared identity and purpose through storytelling or shared experiences?
Mm-hmm.
Could you leverage your own network and influence to encourage others to contribute?
This is great. It's so easy to feel like helpless
Yeah.
when you think about the free rider problem.
Right.
But you're reminding me that like I can use my understanding of it
Yeah.
to become a more effective, change maker.
That's the beauty of Olson's work. It isn't meant
Oh.
to discourage us from collective action,
Right.
but rather to equip us with the knowledge and tools to make a real difference.
I like that.
And remember, collective action isn't always about joining a formal organization or a massive movement.
Right.
It can also be about, these small acts of collaboration and cooperation
Yeah.
in your everyday life. How can you leverage those opportunities to create positive change within your family, your workplace, your community? That's something to think about. So as you navigate the world of groups and organizations, remember Olson's insights. Collective action takes effort, takes strategy, and it requires an understanding of human motivation. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep striving to make a meaningful impact on the groups and causes that you care about most.